What if I told you that Japan's most feared gangsters followed a moral code? Not like the Mafia in The Godfather, but more like samurai in suits. Violent, yes. Criminal, absolutely. But also bound by honor? We've all seen the Mafia in Hollywood. Guns, blood, power. But the Japanese underworld tells a very different story. In films like Outrage or Battles Without Honor and Humanity, Yakuza aren't just villains, they're complex men with rules, loyalty, and even strange pride. They don't just kill, they bow, they apologize, they even donate to society. So how did Japan create a criminal class that wasn't just feared but sometimes respected? What is Jingi, the invisible law that even police couldn't touch? And why are tattoos, missing fingers, and strict rituals seen not as shame but as honor? This isn't a defense of crime. But to understand Japan's hidden logic, we need to dive into the shadows, where fear, justice, and tradition blur into one. Let's begin where it all starts. Why are we so drawn to the underworld? Section 1. Why are we fascinated by the underworld? Why do we admire criminals? Even fear can look strangely attractive. From The Godfather to Scarface, the world has long been obsessed with gangsters. They're dangerous, violent, and often cruel. But they're also decisive, bold, and, in their own way, powerful. It's not just about the crime. It's about what the criminal represents. Rebellion, freedom, a rejection of boring, powerless rules. But here's the question. Why is Japan's underworld so different from the one we see in the West? Why do Japanese gangsters bow, follow rules, and sometimes even apologize? In America, the Mafia is about domination. In Japan, the Yakuza are more like shadow samurai. They follow a code. They protect their group. They even believe in something called Jingi, a strange mix of justice and loyalty. This might sound romantic, but don't be fooled. The Yakuza have done terrible things. Extortion, drugs, violence, and yet, there's something about them that feels organized, almost noble, not in their actions but in how they carry themselves. It's this contrast that fascinates people. How can something so dark feel so disciplined? How can men who break laws act like they follow a deeper law? Maybe it's because humans are drawn to structure. Even in chaos, we look for rules, for meaning, and when society feels empty, even the wrong kind of order can look better than none at all. So let's look closer, not to glorify crime but to understand a culture where the bad guys don't just want power, they want honor. And that's what makes Japan's underworld so unforgettable. Section 2. Fear versus respect. Mafia and Yakuza compared. Power through fear or power through respect? Which one lasts longer? In the West, the Mafia rose to power by making people afraid. If you crossed them, you vanished. If you didn't pay, they made you regret it. The fear was real, and it worked. But fear has a price. It creates silence, not loyalty. It builds obedience, not trust. Now compare that to Japan. The Yakuza also used violence. But they didn't rule only with fear. They used something older, something deeper. A code, a brotherhood, a sense of pride. In Japanese society, shame is powerful. And so is obligation. The Yakuza built their influence by creating bonds, not just threats. They made members feel they belong. And outsiders? They saw them as dangerous but also as disciplined, even useful. Some shop owners in Japan used to say, "I'd rather deal with the Yakuza than a corrupt politician." Why? Because with Yakuza, there were rules. Unwritten, yes, but respected. Of course, not all Yakuza followed this ideal. Many were cruel, many were greedy. But the idea of the Yakuza was different from the Mafia. The Mafia inspired terror. The Yakuza inspired a strange kind of order. So here's the question for you. Which would you rather face? A group that rules by fear? Or a group that believes in honor, even in crime? That difference between fear and respect isn't just about gangsters. It tells us something deeper about how two cultures view power itself. Section 3. What is Jingi? The Yakuza's unspoken code. What if there were rules even for criminals? And what if breaking them meant losing your soul? In the world of the Yakuza, one word stands above all: Jingi. It's hard to translate, but it means something like honor, justice, and loyalty combined. Jingi isn't written in any law book. You won't find it in courtrooms or police files. But for many Yakuza, it's more powerful than any written rule. It tells you how to treat your brothers. It tells you when to bow, when to apologize, and when to punish even yourself. If a Yakuza member makes a mistake that shames the group, he might cut off his own finger. Not because he's forced to, but because Jingi demands it. This is called Yubitsume. It's not just punishment. It's a way to say, I have failed. I accept shame. I seek redemption. You might ask, why would criminals care about honor? But here's the truth. Every society has its own logic. And in the shadows, even criminals need a code. Without it, everything falls into chaos. Jingi created a strange kind of order. It turned gangs into families, violence into discipline, and crime into something that looked like tradition. Of course, not all Yakuza followed Jingi. Some used it as an excuse. But those who believed in it, lived and died by it. And that's what makes the Yakuza different. They didn't just break society's rules. They replaced them with their own. Section 4: Samurai Roots. Why Yakuza aren't just criminals. What if criminals saw themselves as warriors? Not just rebels, but guardians of their own code. The Yakuza didn't appear out of nowhere. They didn't just emerge from poverty or greed. They evolved from something older. Something deeply Japanese. Their roots go back to the Edo period. Some say the Yakuza were born from tequila peddlers and traders. Others say they came from Bakuto gamblers and outcasts. But all agree on one thing. They followed a code of behavior. And they organized, like a clan. That clan-like structure came from the samurai. Even after the samurai class was abolished, its ideas, loyalty, hierarchy, discipline remained in the shadows. And the Yakuza inherited those ideas. They called their boss Oyabun, meaning parent role. Members were called Koban, or child role. It wasn't just a gang. It was a family. Like the samurai, Yakuza trained their minds and their posture. They valued silence. They didn't shout in anger, they stared. They didn't show fear, they bowed. Even punishment was carried out with ritual and form. It wasn't chaos. It was performance. In that performance, they found identity. Not as thugs, but as men of control. Of course, this image wasn't always true. There were many who just wanted money and power. But the samurai ideal gave the Yakuza something powerful. A sense of destiny. A reason to believe in themselves. So the question is, when a society loses its warriors, who fills the void? In Japan, some say, the samurai never truly disappeared. They just changed their clothes. Section 5: Tattoos, Fingers, and Honor. The rituals of the Yakuza. Why would someone cut off their finger? Or cover their entire body in tattoos just to prove loyalty? To outsiders, it looks extreme, even insane. But in the world of the Yakuza, these acts are not just symbols. They are declarations, commitments, and sometimes, apologies. Let's start with the tattoos. Full-body tattoos, called Irezumi, are not for style. They are a sign of belonging. A permanent uniform, hidden under a business suit. Each design tells a story of pain, pride, and identity. Getting tattooed is painful, expensive, and takes years. But that's the point. It's a test. To endure pain, and to prove, I am not afraid of who I am. Now, the fingers. Yubitsume ritual of cutting off a finger is performed when a member breaks a rule or dishonors the group. It is not done by force. It is done by choice. By removing a piece of yourself, you offer shame, regret, and a request for forgiveness. And unlike words, a missing finger can't lie. It is a language of the body. A way to say, I take responsibility. When normal society no longer hears you, these rituals may seem barbaric. But to the Yakuza, they are sacred. They are proof that you are willing to suffer. Not just for yourself, but for the name you carry. And in a world where honor is more important than comfort, pain becomes a kind of pride, a mark not of rebellion, but of devotion. The world may see only crime, but the Yakuza saw ritual, and in ritual, they found meaning. Section 6 Community Guardians? When Yakuza helped society, can criminals ever be heroes? Can the underworld protect the people? It sounds impossible, but in Japan, there were moments when the Yakuza did just that. After the 1995 Kobe earthquake, while government aid was delayed and roads were blocked, some Yakuza groups moved faster than the police. They delivered water, food, blankets and shelter. They didn't wear masks or ask for thanks. They just acted, because to them, protecting their territory meant protecting the people in it. It wasn't just a one-time thing. After the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, Yakuza offices opened their doors. Supplies arrived before the government trucks. Phone lines were set up. Some even organized convoys to reach the hardest-hit areas. Why? Not for fame, not for money, but because Jingi there in spoken code said they must. Now, here's where it gets uncomfortable. Can you imagine the Mafia helping your neighborhood after a disaster? Would people welcome criminals if they were the only ones who showed up? In Japan, the line between good and evil isn't always clean. And the Yakuza knew how to operate in that gray zone. They were feared, but also useful. That doesn't make them saints. It doesn't erase the violence. But it raises a question for all of us. What do we expect from good guys? And what happens when only the bad guys act with honor? In the West, criminals often destroy communities. But in Japan, some Yakuza groups at least for a time protected theirs. So tell me, in your country, could this ever happen? Could criminals become guardians, even for a moment? And if so, what does that say about the society they live in? Section 7 Business, not blood Yakuza and the Japanese economy. When you think of gangsters, do you imagine suits or swords? Boardrooms or back alleys? For the Yakuza, violence was never the end goal. Power was, and in modern Japan, power came not from guns but from money. By the 1980s, many Yakuza groups had become business empires. They ran construction firms. They invested in real estate. They owned bars, casinos, even talent agencies. They weren't just in the shadows anymore. They were at the negotiation tables. They played golf with CEOs. Some even had their own business cards. In a country where harmony and hierarchy matter, the Yakuza knew how to play the game. They used fear when needed, but they preferred contracts to conflict. Police often knew where the local Yakuza office was. It wasn't hidden. It had a nameplate, sometimes even a receptionist. This visibility gave them a strange legitimacy. They weren't pretending to be legal, but they weren't fully underground either. In a way, Japan allowed the Yakuza to exist, because they followed rules. Their own rules, yes, but rules nonetheless. Of course, this wasn't without damage. Yakuza extorted money. They bullied competitors. They rigged deals behind closed doors. But what made them dangerous wasn't that they broke the law. It's that they understood the system and used it better than most. The Western image of a gangster is loud, angry, and reckless. But the Yakuza wore suits. They sat quietly, and they signed deals worth millions. So maybe the real underworld isn't in the streets. It's in the meeting rooms, where no blood is spilled. But power still changes hands. Section 8 Cracking down how modern Japan began erasing the Yakuza. What happens when a nation decides to erase an entire underworld? Not fight it, erase it. For decades, Japan coexisted with the Yakuza. It didn't endorse Timbit, it tolerated them. Why? Because they were visible, predictable, organized. But that changed. By the 1990s, public opinion began to shift. Stories of extortion, drug rings, and corporate blackmail hit the headlines. People began asking, why are these criminals allowed to operate so openly? So the government responded, not with more guns but with laws. The Anti-Boryokuden Law of 1992 didn't just punish crime. It made being a Yakuza itself inconvenient. Banks froze their accounts. Apartments denied leases. Phone contracts were cancelled. Even vending machine companies refused to do business. One by one, the lifelines were cut. Not violently but surgically. And it worked. Yakuza membership dropped dramatically. Many offices closed. Some leaders disappeared without a word. Others went underground. Japan didn't just fight the Yakuza. It erased their space to exist. But here's the twist. In removing them, Japan didn't just eliminate criminals. It eliminated something else: structure. The visible Yakuza were replaced by invisible threats. Looser gangs. Foreign mafias. Online crime. No more rules. No more Jingi. So the question remains, did Japan solve the problem? Or did it just make it harder to see? Sometimes, when you erase something from view, you also erase the ability to control it. Section 9. What was lost? The disappearance of order in the underworld. When you erase darkness, do you create light? Or just a different kind of shadow? After Japan cracked down on the Yakuza, something unexpected happened. Crime didn't disappear. It scattered. Without the Yakuza, the structure vanished. And with it the rules. You see, the Yakuza had rules. Territory lines. Codes of conduct. Even limits on what crimes were acceptable. They kept rival gangs in check. They avoided senseless street violence. And most importantly, they had leaders to answer for the group's actions. But now, you have freelance criminals. Young, untraceable, and loyal to no one. They don't care about shame or honor. They care about quick profit. These new gangs are harder to predict, harder to negotiate with, harder to control. Some call them Hangara, half gray, half black. They're not traditional Yakuza, and they don't want to be. They use social media to scam people. They sell drugs without restraint. They disappear before anyone can stop them. The Yakuza were dangerous, but they were visible. Now the danger has gone underground and gone viral. So here's the paradox. In removing one kind of evil, Japan may have created another. A darker evil, a more chaotic one, a violence with no code, no ritual, no shame. Did Japan win the battle, but lose the balance? Sometimes, it's not about whether order is good or bad. It's about whether anything is keeping the chaos in place. Section 10. Yakuza philosophy. Justice without laws? Can justice exist without law? Can a code of honor survive outside society's approval? The Yakuza lived by rules. But they weren't society's rules. They were older, simpler, harsher, and in some ways more human. They believed in loyalty over legality, in shame over punishment, in silence over shouting, and in honor, even when everything around them was dishonorable. It's easy to dismiss them as villains. And yes, many were. They hurt people. They broke laws. They profited from fear. But they also held on to something rare. A sense of duty. A willingness to accept consequences. And a belief that even in darkness, there must be balance. In a world chasing money and speed, the Yakuza moved slow. They bowed before they fought. They apologized before they demanded. They punished themselves before punishing others. Their world was flawed, but it had shape. It had rhythm. It had rules. And now that it's fading, we're left with a strange question. Was it better to have a dark order than no order at all? The Yakuza are not heroes, but they are mirrors, reflecting the parts of society we ignore. The hunger for belonging, the desire for justice, the need for meaning when the law feels empty. So maybe this is the real lesson. Justice isn't always written, and order doesn't always come from light. Sometimes, the code that lives in the shadows tells us more about ourselves than the laws written in daylight. Cultural habits like this may seem small, but they reflect big ideas. How does your culture compare? Let's share and learn from each other. Leave a comment if you'd like. And please like and subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.